Ants don't serve grasshoppers. It's you who need us.
I think it's fair to say that we all hate our job, because I definitely hate my job. But in this instance, the United Automobiles Workers Association has officially gone on strike as of September 14, 2023, at 12:01 to be specific, because we need to know exactly what time they went on strike. Now, this has been going on for the last 5 days, and the deadline is steadily approaching. At the time of this video, they had until Friday, September 22nd to come to a deal with the Big Three, and this is probably one of the biggest automobile strikes in the history of automobile workers. Now, what this could mean for you and I as consumers is completely different for what it will mean for you and I as workers, because I hate my jobs. There's an S there, but this is bigger than that. So in this episode, we will be exploring the idea of what it means to be standing for your rights as a unionized worker and what this could mean for the future of workers as we know it. So with that being said, stick around and stay tuned, because you're now watching The Breakdown. Roll 'em. As always, if you haven't already, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. It does mean a lot to me and the YouTube algorithm. Please excuse my voice. I'm a bit congested because unfortunately I deal with seasonal allergies. But with that said, we're going to go ahead and go into the history of the Automobile Workers Association very briefly, because this is a lot more bigger than just the history and I don't want to bore you. A lot of you don't watch this section anyway. So let's take that deep dive into what it is and what this means for you. The United Automobiles Workers Association has been around since the 30s. If you don't know anything about cars, cars have been around since the late 1800s and have evolved steadily with the assembly line as well as the productivity and the efficiency of the skilled labor worker, in addition to surviving two very different world wars. The United Automobiles Workers Association was developed in 1937 and has officially grown into the union labor that we know today. So this is not the first time that the UAW has gone on strike. One of the biggest strikes that ever happened in 1945 under Mr. William Reuther, who was the president at the time. And the first strike was the first sit-down strike in Atlanta, Georgia at the GM plant. And of course, that's not the one right by Hateville. I don't think, was that on Hateville? That wasn't on Hateville. That was the one on Peachtree Industrial. It was the one on Peachtree Industrial. Okay, back in professional form. But the UAW went on strike back in Atlanta, Georgia, and then it flourished its way over into Michigan, and eventually they would meet their demands of 17% increases as well as better working hours. Now, if you don't know anything about the OEM sector, the OEM sector is split into typically 3 to 4 sectors, which is manufacturing, sales and service, finance, and legal. Of all of those different sectors, the one that has the most say-so in many things is the producer or the manufacturing arm. They're typically comprised of a different sub-company. So in many cases, you'll see something like Toyota Manufacturing as opposed to Toyota of America. And that is to distinguish that one is a manufacturing arm and one is a sales and service arm. The crazy part is that back in the 40s, the demands were not very much different than what it is today. And if you don't know anything about manufacturing, it is a constant flow of production. In many cases, many of these workers often work tumultuous hours, sometimes 7 days a week, and only a small percentage of the workforce are actually unionized, whereas most of them are temporary workforce. As a person who works on the parts and service distribution network at one point or another, I can tell you that many of us were not associates and many of us were temporary associates, which is often used as a cost-cutting measure by the company. The biggest issue with this UAW strike is it is a matter of cost-cutting and stripping away of human rights, as well as proper working conditions to ensure that we as the middle class, upper middle class, lower middle class can continue to afford to live our lives. The big 3 companies that are involved in this strike all have benefited from the idea of huge profit sharing, as well as cut costs and expenses and a reduced labor workforce, which has allowed them to run quite efficiently and more lean. But the more important component is that much of the pay has not increased, unlike the CEOs who own them. Now, the same script was the same as it is today as it was yesterday. They were saying the same bullshit, let me tell you. So I happened to be reading, right? And then I found out that back in the day, them CEOs had said the same thing. They was like,
we ain't about to do all that. Y'all don't, what y'all need money for?
And the workers was like,
we need to eat, sir.
And they was like,
you don't need to eat. What you need to eat for? Keep working.
And yeah, they went on strike. Back into professional form. And what ended up happening was that many of them went on strike, and the strike was successful, but to reach those demands, many of the workers had to stand their ground, and thus this is the importance of unions. Now, in terms of the current strike today, this is much different than what it was in the 40s and the 70s. Now, there was a decline in membership for the union workers back in the 70s, and we are going to begin to see more increase tenfold as you begin to see this year in 2023. Many more people have decided to go on strike because they are sick of the bullshit. You can only strip away so many perks and things from a company worker before you start to piss them off. And if you've ever seen many of the strife between company workers and CEO, it always boils back down to pay and privilege. And in many cases, the same CEOs are so disconnected from the realities of the day-to-day operation, grueling working conditions, as well as the non-incentive of pay, and truly remarkably able to cognitively dissonantly, I made that word up because it aligns with the bullshit that they come up with.
Sir, the actors are here to audition for the part of you. Excellent.
To be able to not understand the importance of a proper work-life balance. Even though they say and preach that that's what they want, they don't really want that shit. Now, in today's progressive strike, this is probably one of the more brilliant strikes that has ever come across the United Auto Workers history. In fact, this can completely change us as American society as we know it. Now, the thing is, when it comes to workers and it comes to the Automobile Association, we need those people to produce. And yes, there are other manufacturers such as BMW, such as Toyota, such as Volvo. The problem is that many of those companies are American workers. Now, I've done a video about Buick and what it means to be globalized and centralized in China and how they've lost their American heritage. Go check that video out because it does explain quite a few things about what I'm talking about today. But in the biggest instance, one of the bigger problems with a lot of the American manufacturers, unlike their counterparts who have made American workers, many of the American manufacturers actually have outsourced and globalization themselves across the globe to make more profit because the cost of labor is cheaper as opposed to paying American workers. And what this means is that basically a lot of the perks are stripped away because a lot of the purchasing power does not necessarily lie in the American citizen. It lies in the other countries, as well as the relationship that these bigger corporations have with those other countries. I know that sounded like a lot of humbo jumbo. That's because I
Slick made it up.
but that's not the point. It's just an opinion.
That's my opinion!
The bigger issue is the globalization of these companies allows for them to not pay their workers their proper wage. And what ends up happening is that as stagnant wages continue to grow, it creates more and more struggle for the average American worker who is helping to produce these items to have a harder trouble keeping up with their personal lives. In addition to medical costs, in addition to cost of living, in addition to the basic necessities such as groceries and gas, it becomes increasingly expensive for someone who is making the cars to be able to produce those cars. And this particular strike is very different because there is going to be much more at stake. Let me explain. So this strike, unlike any other strike, is not the typical walk the f out. Because that's what I would have did, walk the f out. I wouldn't have walked out. I wouldn't have walked out. But I would have stood in solidarity and I would have walked out with everybody. If everybody was walking out, I would have walked out with them. But I'm not like walking out by myself. Like, it's kind of embarrassing. Like, y'all ever did that? Y'all seen that in the movies. It cues for great dramatic music, but it does not make for a good look. Like, it will get you written up and potentially fired if it's not unionized. But I digress. This particular strike is very, very different because the strike is more of a progressive situation. So as the days go on and the days get longer without setting the contract right and meeting the demands of the workers, different plants will actually shut down. Right now, the plants that are currently shut down are the ones that control the Ford Bronco, as well as the Jeep Wrangler, and I believe in GM, I want to say the GMC Canyon. I could be wrong about that. But I know definitely the Ford Bronco and the Jeep Wrangler plants have shut down. And so this is just the beginning. And once we begin to get into the F-150s, the heavy hitters, the Dodge Challengers, once we get into those plants, into different phases of the strike, we will begin to see the impacts. Now, keep in mind, during the pandemic, we already had enough supply chain issues. The longer the strike goes on, the more supply chain disruptions will occur, and thus will create more price gouging for consumers. Now, that's only part of it. The other part is that as the longer the strike goes on, more commercial fleet vehicles as well as rentals will decrease in supply, because as they either get wrecked or they go out of service and into selling into the aftermarket, the big three are normally the big producers of these rental fleets. This will begin to have an impact on other companies. And so this strike is probably one of the bigger components of what it means to remain unionized and stand your ground. The demands actually aren't difficult, and they're pretty reasonable from what I understand. One of the big things about this strike is that it has impacted all three companies, from Ford to GM to Stellantis. All three CEOs have talked about this, and in particular, Mary Barra and Jim Farley have both said that they don't really understand the demands at which the workers are asking for, because they believe that what the workers are currently getting are very generous. Unlike the many millions and millions of dollars they have received over the last 10 years, there's some disconnect here. Very elitist. And the demands in this one obviously show that the workers demand more. Now, one of the big things is that the UAW commands a 40% increase over the next couple of years, and they really want the average pay to go up, but they also want a 4-day work week, because again, many of these workers work 7 days a week, and it has begun to become more of a problem, and also the production is unsustainable. In comparison, it is always about the CEO's average salary compared to the worker. Now, for GM, the median salary was $80,034 in 2022, which would take the average worker 362 years to catch up to the CEO Mary Barra's salary. At Ford, the median salary was $74,691, whereas it would take $281 to catch up to Jim Farley. And at Stellantis, the median pay was $64,000 and would take almost 365 years, although the company noted in its annual report that the disparity includes expenses related to the Tavares one-time grant, and that was basically a 298-to-1 ratio. I don't know what any of that has to do with the price of tea in China. Basically, I know that these workers are being paid significantly less than their CEOs, who simply just make decisions, whereas the people on the front line make decisions that impact the business literally every single day. Now, the other thing that many of these workers commanded was the pre-2008 concessions, which basically says to give back the benefits that were stripped away. Back in 2008, it was a compromise to receive the bailout money that Obama had presented, and I want to try to steer away from the politics of everything because I know that can be a touchy subject, but it's to be said that there was a lot that was given to the companies to be bailed out and not the American citizens. And we began to see the importance and the impact of that, as many of those people who once were able to retire comfortably from those big three companies can no longer do that. Now, the issue that I saw in all of this was that not just the globalization was an issue, but the privatization and the stripping away of certain rights and regulations. Now, a lot of the real issue that comes along is the privatization and pretty much making less and less associates permanent to not pay benefits. And a lot of it boils down to, actually, in fact, a lot of it, all of it, boils down to profit. That's what it always boils down to. It always boils back down to profit margin, which is a byproduct of capitalism. Now, I won't get into capitalism, but I'm gonna tell y'all this much. Back in the 40s, they accused the strike workers of being communists. So take it that what you will. I just know that it was very interesting to see the parallels in what the CEOs were saying back in the 40s as opposed to saying today in 2023. The script did not change. It was very much, baby, I don't know what y'all got going on. But my check coming in on a second, right? Now, you're probably wondering how this impacts you as a consumer. Now, as I've said before, this can impact you in several different ways. One of the big ways that it's going to impact you is that the price of those American cars is going to go up if you like your American cars. There's going to be much more supply chain disruptions that's going to occur as a result, making it that much more harder to get those cars that you love, especially the specialty performance models. As less and less people are producing cars, that means more work and more volume and less ability to produce for the tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 suppliers. In the automotive world, there are 3 different sectors. There is the supplier, there is the manufacturer, and there is the retailer. The retailer is what most people know in the retail channel as the dealership. The manufacturer, most people know as the car companies, and the supplier is the one who produces the parts, typically for the car companies. The longer that more of these people are off work, basically, it's going to be more expensive to repair your car because the supplier has to make more money to accommodate for the lack of cars that's being produced. So basically, this is going to cause the cost of repairs to go up because now mechanics are going to have to charge more because those costs are going to have to be passed on to you, as well as the rental car companies, their prices per day are going to go up because they're going to have less and less inventory. This is also going to mean that there's less spending from those people who are working, and there are right now over 13,000 workers who are currently on strike, but there will be more as time goes on. And if they're not spending in those cities, it will begin to ricochet and basically dynamically chain into other issues and could cost potentially the economy billions. You won't directly feel this immediately, but over time you will feel this as a consumer, whether it be for travel, whether it be for gas, whether it be for car repairs, you will begin to experience this as it happens. And so this is a big deal because this also is a grounds for standing up for your rights. And we will likely see more and more companies begin to call into question the importance of unions. I would love to hear you guys' perspective on unionized workers as it pertains to the automobile industry. If you know anything about that, if you have any type of experience with that, feel free to leave a comment below because I'd love to hear your experience, as well as what you think will happen and how this will impact us in the car community, more importantly, as consumers in the American market. With that being said, like I said, go check out my video about Buick because it does explain a few things about globalization and how American car companies are becoming less and less American. With that being said, if you like this kind of content, feel free to like and subscribe. And until the next video, I will see you guys later.